If you're applying for Singapore universities, you must have already clicked yes on the tuition grant scheme. Why wouldn't you? It slashes your tuition fee by 50%. But here's the reality. The Singapore's tuition grant is not a scholarship, it's a contract. And like any other contract, if you break it even accidentally, the penalties are severe. Hello everyone, I'm Jay Surya, founder of Project IV, a career counseling and admission consulting firm in India. And today we're going to do a deep dive into Singapore's Ministry of Education's tuition grant scheme. If you're an international student applying to Singaporean universities and considering applying for the tuition grant, this video is a must-watch. First, the basics. What is a tuition grant scheme? The Singapore government's Ministry of Education offers a tuition grant for high-achieving international students who are applying to the Singaporean public university. This grant subsidizes your university fee by almost 50%. But here's the catch. In return, you need to sign a 3-year contract bond with Singapore government saying that you will work in a Singapore entity for 3 years post-graduation from the university. Here's a crucial definition. What is a Singapore entity? It is any of those companies that are registered with ACRA, Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority in Singapore. Yes, you can work for a Singaporean-based company or an international company based in Singapore like Google Singapore, DBS Singapore, etc. No, it's not for freelancers who are serving overseas clients without a registered company or entity in Singapore. For design and art students, however, like those graduating from NUS or NAFA, self-employment is allowed but is strict. First, you must register under a company in ACRA and prove that your income is taxable. You cannot just be a digital nomad. So how do you apply for this tuition grant? It's very simple. It's part of your university application process itself, and it's not a separate application. If you're applying to any of the Singaporean public universities like NUS, NTU, SIT, SMU, etc., within your university application itself, you can choose whether you want to be opted in for the tuition grant or not. So the next obvious question is, will I get a tuition grant? The government gives tuition grants purely on merit basis. The top preference is given to extraordinary achievers like international Olympiad winners or international athletes, etc. Don't be scared. Obviously, that number is going to be less. So the next preference is given to high achievers in terms of grades. However, in order to get the tuition grant, you need to be first admitted into the public university. But remember, admission doesn't mean you get a tuition grant. Usually in the university offer letter itself, you'll know whether you got the tuition grant or not. If you get a tuition grant, you need to sign a legal bond agreeing that you'll work in Singapore for 3 years post-graduation. Now let's talk about those scenarios which keep students awake at night. Scenario A, I graduated but I can't find a job. This is the most common fear. The bond requires you to start work immediately post-graduation. But what if the market is bad and you are not able to find a job? Here's the rule. The Ministry of Education typically gives you a grace period of 12 months post-graduation given you prove that you are continuously searching for jobs. During this year, you are expected to be actively hunting for jobs. You need to keep a proof of your job application and rejection letters. If you still can't find job after 12 months, you are technically in the breach of the contract. To be honest, Minister of Education actually does give consideration and reviews case-by-case basis. If you're able to prove that you've been genuinely, trying to find jobs, you might get extra grace period. But if the MOE isn't convinced about your case, then they'll initiate something called the liquidated damage, which we'll cover shortly. Now, there's the scenario B where you want to do masters immediately post-graduation. Can I delay the bond? Yes, you can delay the bond, but you need to first apply for a deferment. However, it's complicated. To get approved, you need to provide a banker's guarantee, which means you or your parents need to deposit some amount of cash, which is often 100% of the complete discount that you got from the universities in the bank, which serves as a collateral. If your potential penalty is $100,000, you need to lock away the $100,000 cash in the bank until you graduate from the university and come back to Singapore. You don't get to use the money, it sits as a guarantee that you will come back. However, there is an exception. If you get that deferment for a PhD or a master's program in a Singaporean university, the requirements might be less strict, but approval is never automatic. Now let's talk about the nuclear option, breaking the bond. Maybe you get a dream job in another country or you just want to go home. What happens? You have to pay something called the liquidated damages. Here's the formula. It is the total grant amount plus 10% compound interest per annum through the 4 years. For example, let's say the grant subsidized $20,000 for 4 years. That is $80,000 in principal. and add a 10% compound interest for every year that you study there. So by the time you graduate, that $80,000 tuition grant debt can look like $110,000 to $120,000 overall. And you have to pay all of that in a lump sum. You cannot pay in installments. So should you take this tuition grant? For the 95% of you, the answer is still yes. Singapore is an incredible place to launch a career. The salaries are high, the taxes are low, and the 3 years just go by very fast. Especially if you're choosing streams in tech, management, or finance. Job hunting is not very hard, but competitive for sure. But here's my advice. Treat the job hunt as a 4th year module. Don't wait until graduation, start interning within 2nd year. Also save an emergency fund if you're forced to break the bond. You don't want to be legally pursued by the Singapore government. Finally, don't ghost the Ministry of Education. If you're actually struggling to find a job, make sure the tuition grant authorities know it. They're stricter with people who disappear than with people who actually ask for help. If you're confused about the math or need any help planning your application strategy, not just for Singapore, but any Indian abroad university, reach out to us. We help students weigh the return on investment of these decisions every day. Drop a comment below. Does the 3-year bond actually scare you, or is it a fair trade for world-class education and career? Tell us what you want us to talk about in the next video.